Welcome back to How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom. Anime Review, episode number 5. This one is basically doing the 5th episode of the series, Well Fed, Well Regarded. Excuse me. As terms adaptation for this one, I'm like, wow, they cut a lot out of this one. Mostly what they cut from this one is basically like a little bit that was remaining from chapter 3. They pretty much, like, here are the events happening in order, basically happening. So we first start off with basically the food they skipped over from last week, which was the udon fruit. Yep, the udon, well, the noodles. Yep, well, they introduced it as sort of like a slime, and we have Poncho just, well, cutting the thing up and cook up like basically looks like a thing of noodles mixed with other stuff. And they ask Sultama to have it first because he's familiar with the food. He tries it, really good. And then Alicia is just like, I'll chip in too. Yep. And after finish up that, basically the whole broadcast gets finished up right afterwards. And of course, Bob's like, we have somebody else because he basically just rather not do it. And then right after, like 1 week later, if you're curious though, what was cut here? Like, a lot was cut here. Like, there's 2 bits of dialogue, and there's some set for book 2 that they cut out here with Dukedom. Yeah, they cut that out. And they cut out an interlude, which they might do eventually, of course. It's possible. We cut to 1 week later, where Sultama is basically just in his office, finishing up having some udon, doing some paperwork, and then May comes in. She says that Marks wants to see him. And he's figured, like, why not here? And it goes to the throne room. I would think he would bring his fiancée with him because this is basically the prime minister of the country. And Lucia is set to be the queen. But nope, it's Sultama, Marks, and Hiroma. The one who's extra of a genius when it comes to basically knowledge like this. Marx feels as though little he's done, and basically feels as though enough, he decided to step aside as the prime minister and appoint the man next to him, the one who Sultama basically approved of from the last episode, appointed him as the prime minister. And he's like, okay. But to find something for him to do, oh, don't worry. He plays a small role later on in the book. He takes a new position, but it's not prime minister anymore. Nope. He's no longer prime minister. And then, of course, well, in the book, they actually kind of move this little lineup a bit because in the book, there's actually more time here going on, but they cut it out. Now, in the book, basically, what Hiroshima, I think it's pronounced his name. I want to make sure I get this right. Hirokawa. What he says to Sultama, he actually says it in his office. They changed the throne room for this particular scene. What he asked him to do is to take some time off because he's been probably because he's overworked, and even though he's like so nonchalant about it, he just doesn't do it anyways. He's just fine. He says, why don't you take the princess on a date and take Alicia as your escort? He's like, okay, I could do that. So he goes to see them. Now this whole scene, this next bit basically is in the book itself. It's completely unaltered, where you have Alicia and Lucia, where they're basically dueling each other. Very good. I got hands to the anime. They did a really good job with the scene. It's also scene to the point they could easily done some damage to the castle to stop. And then they go to a gazebo. Yes, a gazebo of all things. I know what this thing is because I've seen gazebos. And PHSC, the Dade City campus, has got one of these. Though they use this thing mostly for a lot of people to smoke. I am not kidding about that. They seriously have gazebos meant for doing that. So we have Alicia sitting to Sultama's left, and you have Lucia sitting right in front of him, basically from across from him. And just to go on a date, and they go to the castle town, and Alicia basically become, well, their escort. And, well, they decided to go. Now, oh boy, they cut a lot of this particular scene. They basically condensed this down Where, well, basically the first bit when first before they go, we actually have them putting on this a set of school uniforms. In the anime, it's appearance wise, it's they take inspiration from the manga interpretation of the actual uniforms that they're wearing, where they look like school uniforms. That's what I can tell, anyways, because I read the manga portion of this. The actual book itself doesn't really describe the actual appearance of these particular outfits very well. So they take a little inspiration from, well, probably from the manga and probably from also European style, probably from the British style of basically school clothing. We have Lucia come out wearing glasses. Now the line that he says to her about her glasses, that's actually light novel pulled directly from that. That's basically what light novel is. No really change there. Comment that she looks good in glasses, and then you have Alicia asking how she looks basically in the outfit. There's a bit of a change of dialogue for her, but mostly it's the same. And Alicia does something she does not do in the book. She actually hugs. Alicia hugs Lucia. Yeah, hugs her, and she's like, "Why are you hugging me?" And then later on, they're going in a carriage. Now, this is a bit of a condensed version of basically what happened next, because there's a little more material that comes from here. So, he basically says, well, they call me by my given name. You mean Sotoma? No, Katsuma. But I thought Sotoma was your given name. Yeah, so he reveals that everything is of a European style. That bit is for the book. That's not a change. That actually is from the book itself. They mentioned that. So he explains it, and of course, this whole scene is pretty much playing exactly the way it is in the book, which I do appreciate. They didn't change the particular thing. And then when they leave the carriage, they just walk about for a bit, and they sit down in the park, and they chat for a bit, and then, of course, Alicia gets hungry. Now, before I get to what happens next, is there cuts here? Oh God, yes, there's a lot of cuts here. Like, there's a big discussion on on nationalizing garbage disposal. Yes, they have several pages basically dedicated to this thing. And my guess is the reason why the JC staff is to cut this particular thing from the anime. And this is my personal theory. I think they cut it because I think a lot of people probably thought that this was boring to basically explain in the anime. I think the cash crop thing was fine. That probably was a little more interesting, talking about garbage disposal. Yes. I mean, they go in full detail in the book. Every single little step, basically, about certain recycling stuff. Yeah, they cut out, they cut this whole conversation about this out. And they also cut a bit, basically, about changing the laws. That's completely cut out there. And they actually have it where her saying she's hungry set in a different scene that's in the book itself. I don't really have a really big problem with it. I think it changes perfectly fine. But in the case of this, I think that basically just condensing the trip basically fit perfectly fine for time constraints to the anime. And of course, Elisa starts to get hungry, so they decide, why not go to Juna's cafe? And they do. They go to her cafe. And of course, this next bit is in the book itself, because I was reading this thing, rereading this thing right after I watched the anime, where Juna's about to call Katsuma by his, well, call him her, his majesty's, and of course he explains she's something else. And like if she kind of right away, and then of course they sit down and of course have the udon, of course have the udon again, and of course Alicia herself basically is, well, hinting she might have there's some hints basically of her might have a little bit of interest in Sotoma. And of course there's a little bit of dialogue cut here, but not much, where it's a lot of beautiful women here, and basically talk about be beautiful, talk about the nervous, talk about a pretty woman, and of course completely out of nowhere. And of course in the book I think there was a mild bit of build up here, it just comes completely random, where Lucia reveals polygamy is legal here. And he's like, what? Of course he mentioned about being engaged, and she mentions that polygamy is legal. You can actually have as much as 8 wives, and you might be asking, does Sotoma take 8 wives? And, well, let's see. I want to make sure I get this correct. Let's see. 1, 2. Let's see. So far it's 2. 3. 4. 5, 6. Yes. Overall, it's basically six wives that he does take. Yeah, it's basically 6 wives. Yeah, that's how many wives takes in the books. Now, the first I read up to is basically book 5. I'm basically partially into book number 6, which uses a different character who basically becomes a queen. Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm roughly 124 pages into it. So, yeah. In the case Lucia basically mentioned how many wives that Sultana takes, it's almost on the mark. And then, of course, then we hear a conversation, which is actually partially into page 145, about, like, some about, oh yeah, like, can't do that, whatever, and look like a fox girl, and that's where the anime ends. Also, they cut out the bit about, and this is not even in the last episode either, where Sultan mentioned he could create an actual district for the actual mystic wolf, the wolves, basically Totomo species. And they cut that out from the anime somewhere. That would have been interesting to keep in, but they cut it out. That's the only change I only cut out basically didn't like. Yeah, but this episode was definitely really good. I think the stuff they cut out were pretty necessary. I personally don't have a problem with it at all. Though the only thing I would disagree with cutting out is the build up to book 2. They cut that out completely here. There's no mention of dukedoms here. There's not even a scene from them in the anime. My guess is they're probably saving that for later. That's just my personal theory. And if I looked up in the actual book itself, they adapted somewhat up to page 145 out of, I think it's like 200 and how many pages is the course according to English releases, same thing. This is up to 145. It's basically 145 out of 231 pages. Yeah, that's as far as I got with it. I'd say they're almost there with this book. Like, how many more episodes could we see of basically book 1? It'd be shocker. Basically, this takes up pretty much most of the first season of the season. It's distinctly possible. There's a lot of stuff happening in these books. A lot of stuff. Yep. So yeah, not much else to say in this episode. It was actually just really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yep. So yeah, that's it for this particular review. Stay tuned for next review, which will be the case study of Volantis. Okay, next video. Bye.